And time to take a look at what's been making headlines across the globe. And today, for that duty, that falls on the shoulders of Alison Sargent. Hello.
Hi, Annette.
And you're going to start in Spain, where the papers there have been looking at this weekend's general election.
That's right. Spain's fourth election in 4 years. The paper El País says that this campaign has really been dominated by Spain's far-right Vox party and the issue of Catalan independence, because Vox takes a very hard line against separatists, and El País writes that that has really ended up pushing the right-wing People's Party and the centrist Ciudadanos to really adopt that extreme stance, since they're afraid of losing votes to Vox, to the far right, as they did in the last elections in April. El País is also really worried about seeing violence in Catalonia on Sunday. With all of that tension, Annette, you might say that Spain could use a wall, and that is exactly what we see in the cartoon, this cartoon from El Mundo. This is Catalonia's President Kim Torra on the phone with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He's asking her if maybe Catalonia can have what's left of the Berlin Wall.
And of course, the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall happens this weekend. And how have newspapers been covering this occasion?
I thought this article from the German tabloid Bild was quite fun. They've gone back and found some people who are in some of those iconic photos, climbing over the wall, tearing down the wall, things like that. One of them is this boy who we see here. This is Andreas Dietsch. He is 12 years old in that photo where he's kind of putting a stake into the wall, and then now he's in his 40s. We see him there on the other side. Other papers, though, around the world, outside of Germany, are really doing a lot of soul-searching about just how successful German reunification has been. The Washington Post writes that even children who were born after the fall of the wall, well, they still grew up really with a sense of division. The paper explains that it's this sense of being sort of second-class citizens for Germans in East Germany that has led to Germany's far-right AfD party gaining so much support in the east of the country. One East German who spoke to the Washington Post really lamented the fact that now they're getting blamed as for the rise of the far right and sort of cast as Nazis in a way, when it's much more complicated than that when you look at their history. But seeing them cast as Nazis is exactly what we have in this cartoon from the French paper Libération. This cartoonist Willem sees this as the East-West divide, and these Western Germans there are saying maybe it's time to rebuild the wall.
Now, heading to Italy for what is a rather disturbing story, isn't it, Alison? A Holocaust survivor there having been given a police escort after receiving threats from far-right extremists.
You know, very shocking story. This woman is on the front page of Corriere della Sera along with her two police escorts. Her name is Liliana Segre. She is 89 years old and is a senator for life in Italy. And the death threats against her, which she says she's always gotten, unfortunately, increased by a lot after she put forward a proposal establishing a parliamentary commission to fight racism, anti-Semitism, and hate speech. This proposal was passed by the Italian government last week, but it's worth noting that Matteo Salvini's far-right League Party and Berlusconi's Forza Italia Party both abstained from the vote. Since the proposal passed, as I said, the threats against Segre got so bad, she had to be placed under police escort, much to the horror of many people in Italy. And Corriere della Sera has pointed out that there has been an outpouring of support for her from many people and many lawmakers, so at least there is that.
Good to hear. Well, moving on to what is probably a lighter story, and a case, dare I say, of francophone pride gone a little bit crazy. This one from Canada's French-speaking region, Quebec, where a young French woman, as in somebody who was born and raised in France, had her immigration application knocked back for an extraordinary reason.
That's right. And the extraordinary reason is that as a French person, she apparently did not demonstrate adequate proficiency in the French language. This despite being from France and having been in Quebec since 2012. She's getting a PhD in molecular biology, and the reason that immigration gave for rejecting her immigration application this time around was that she did not do all of her education in French because one part of her thesis was written in English, which, as she has pointed out, out is quite normal when you're in the science field where a lot of things have to be published in English. Anyway, she was heartbroken. She said getting the news was like an avalanche falling on her head, and she does plan to appeal the case, and it is getting quite a bit of press, so I think she has a good
I just
chance.
don't really understand that, because in Canada the two official languages are, dare I say, English and French.
But apparently the Quebec region kind of has special say over who gets to immigrate there.
Oh, very interesting indeed. Now, to the other side of the world, to the Antipodes, in particular to New Zealand, and the parliament there has been shaken up by a generational conflict all around the phrase, "OK, boomer."
Yeah, and I don't know if you've heard of the phrase "okay, boomer."
No.
Not all of our viewers might have heard of this. It is something that has gone quite viral online in recent weeks, maybe even months. This is boomer as in baby boomer, which is the generation born roughly between 1945 and the early 1960s. As I said, it's gone viral online sort of as a way for young people to brush off the views of older generations. They're seen as, when they say things that are seen as sort of out of touch or condescending. In this case, in New Zealand, it was a 25-year-old lawmaker who was speaking about climate change when she was heckled by an older member of the parliament, and she responded to him by saying, "Okay, boomer." This has been getting a lot of attention and a lot of response. It's quite controversial, it turns out. I pulled out one reaction from a baby boomer writing in the publication Bloomberg. His biggest concern about the phrase is that it reinforces ageism, he says, in much the same way that phrases like "sure, kiddo" kind of dismiss young people. He says that he is pleased that the next generation seems sort of less racist and less sexist than their predecessors, but he says, well, maybe they should also consider taking up the cause of the growing age segregation in society. To which some people might say, "Okay, boomer."
Well, okay, this Gen Xer is now going to talk about a story here where we go from baby boomers to millennials with a quick word, Alison, about the latest craze from Silicon Valley.
That's right, Nat. You and many of our viewers have probably heard about digital detoxes. This goes even a step further than that. This is something known as a dopamine fast. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's responsible for how we feel pleasure, and apparently the overstimulation of modern life is making us less sensitive to dopamine because we now have too much pleasure. We can't even feel it anymore. To break this addiction, The Independent explains that those who want to have a dopamine fast refrain from almost all activities. I'm going to give you a list: eating, using technology, listening to music, exercising, having sex or touching another's body, working, making eye contact, and talking. Pretty much.
So what do you do?
Pretty much anything. I think you sit and you try not to blink.
Yes. And thanks for that, Alison. And of course, if you want to find out more about the stories we've just been chatting about, you can, of course, head to our website, that being france24.com.